Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ilera-Wellness. My name is Gisela Deschion. I'm passionate about naturopathy, and I have the pleasure of hosting this interview with my sister Solange, who is a doctor in nutrition and a coach in naturopathy. And I'm so honored to have our new invitee, who is a Dr. Gundry. So Dr. Gundry is actually a heart surgeon. He has performed over 10,000 heart surgeries. He's also the author of the book Plant Paradox, which I have here. I love this book, by the way. And he's also the founder and the director of the Center for the Restorative Medicine in Palm Springs and Santa Barbara in California. So thank you so much, Dr. Gundry, for accepting our invitation.
Sisters, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Doctor. So you are a heart surgeon. You are also a medical researcher. And one of your books, which I have here with me, The Plant Paradox, is a New York Times bestseller, which reveals that gluten is one variety of a plant-based toxic protein that we call lectin. Can you briefly explain to our audience what are lectins and how you discovered that lectins were harmful to human beings when ingested?
Well, so lectins are part of the plant defense system against being eaten by their predators. And believe it or not, plants do not want to be eaten. They were not put here on Earth for our enjoyment. They want to grow, they want to have babies, seeds, and they want to make sure their babies grow. And so, unfortunately, they don't have a defense like we do of running or hiding or fighting, but they're chemists of incredible ability, and they can turn sunlight into matter, and we haven't figured out how to do that. So they use chemical biologic warfare against their predators, including us. And so lectins are plant proteins that are described as sticky plant proteins, and they look for specific sugar molecules to stick to. And those sugar molecules line our mouth, they line our esophagus, they line our gut, they line, believe it or not, our joint spaces. They even line the space between nerves, where one nerve talks to the other. And I got interested in them because they line our blood vessels. And so lectins first got my interest because they were not a major part of the human diet up until about 10,000 years ago, when we transitioned from a hunter-gatherer diet to an agricultural diet and began eating primarily grains and beans as the foundation of our diet. And what most of us, and my research at Yale as an undergraduate was in human evolution. And most of us don't realize that we were all actually very tall creatures up until about 10,000 years ago. Men and women were about 6 feet tall up until 10,000 years ago. And we shrunk somewhere between 8 to 12 inches in a matter of 2,000 years after we began eating grains and beans. That's a big drop.
Right.
So this is the system against us, and that's lectins have been known about for well over 100 years. They're how we blood type, and there was a very popular diet called the blood type diet, or Eat Right for Your Type, by Dr. D'Amato, that was actually a lectin elimination diet. He thought that people maybe wouldn't be too interested in lectins, so he didn't speak a lot about that, but it is a lectin elimination diet as well. And I guess I'm famous for reintroducing lectins to people.
Right.
The book's been translated into 36 foreign languages, so I guess it got pretty popular. Still is very popular.
It is.
Yes. Exactly. So, doctor, so if lectin are found in some fruit and vegetables that we usually eat, that means that lectin have been a part of our diet for a long time. So our ancestors did not have to worry so much about lectins than we do today. So why are we so sensitive to lectins nowadays?
I think that's a great question. just because plants want to protect themselves and they want to do us harm. Well, we want to protect ourselves and we want our own defense against the troublemaker lectins. And we do have a significant line of defenses, very much like setting up a professional football game. So we have stomach acid, and acid in general breaks down proteins. And so many lectins are degraded by stomach acid. We have a layer of mucus that lines everything, including our gut. And mucus is a mucopolysaccharide, and that is a sugar molecule that lectins stick to. And if we have a lot of mucus, the lectins never get to where they want to get, which is actually the wall of our gut and get through our gut. Then we have bacteria, our microbiome. And believe it or not, there is a lot of bacteria that enjoy eating lectins. There's even a gluten-eating bacteria. And what's been happening to us in our modern diet is we have decimated our defense systems. We have taken antibiotics for no good reason, and it's quite frankly wiped out our microbiome. There's antibiotics in the animals that we eat that also wipe out the microbiome. Tons of us have been told we should take antacids and acid-blocking drugs for heartburn. And so we've wiped out a lot of the acid producing. Plus, the largest prescription and non-prescription pill are NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agents, drugs, like Advil, like Aleve, like Ibuprofen. And what drug companies didn't tell us, but it's in the literature and I reference it, is that you swallow an ibuprofen, it's like swallowing a hand grenade. It will literally create a crater in your small intestine where lectins have a free shot right through.
Wow.
So when people say, well, my great-great-grandparents in Africa or France ate all the foods that you told us to avoid and they didn't have a problem. Mm-hmm. Well, that's because they didn't have broad-spectrum antibiotics. They didn't have acid-reducing drugs. They didn't have ibuprofen. And I talk about this as the 7 deadly disruptors. So it takes 2 to tango. And we've, unfortunately, as you learn, sister, coming to, from France to the United States and Canada, the food is totally different. And, what they've been exposed to is totally different. So, and you found out the hard way, and it's very true.
Indeed. So in your book, The Plant Paradox, you mentioned at one point that each person has a different tolerance to lectins, right? So does it mean that as long as some people do not have any negative reaction to lectins, they can still consume those products that have lectins in them?
That's a great question. Now, about 70% of my practice now is autoimmune diseases. And I can tell you that people who have autoimmune disease have a leaky gut, period. And if you had asked me 15 years ago if somebody had a leaky gut, I would tell you that that was pseudoscience, that it was witchcraft. Now, in fact, somebody on my Instagram, a doctor said, leaky gut is pseudoscience. Well, I would have agreed 15 years ago, but now we know that Hippocrates, the father of medicine, was right when he said that all disease begins in the gut. And, he didn't have the Human Microbiome Project. He didn't have leaky gut tests, but the guy was a genius. And he knew that our diseases came from literally leaky gut. And so now we can measure this, and I do in my clinics. And every human being with an autoimmune disease that I've encountered has a leaky gut. And the exciting thing is when we seal a leaky gut by removing lectins, among other things, 94% of my patients with a biomarker-proven autoimmune disease in 6 months' time are negative for their autoimmune disease. Not bad, not bad. And that's just published data. So getting back to your question, when we started looking at inflammatory markers in our patients, we found that people who thought they weren't sensitive to lectins had markers of inflammation that when we took lectins away from them, or the major ones, that those markers of inflammation subsided. And when they reintroduced those lectins after those markers went away, many of them, it came right back. So can you get away with it? Sure, a lot of people can, but again, in our society now, particularly in the West, and unfortunately we've exported our diet to the world, sadly, it's becoming less and less easy to tolerate these, what should be easily tolerable plant defense systems.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So they are not completely insensitive to lectins.
Yeah, I mean, let me give you an example from the book, and we see this all the time. We'll have a patient who was originally from Hungary, for example, who came over, who was eating brown breads, was eating, you know, let's just use brown breads for an example. Came over to the United States and developed terrible autoimmune diseases, developed terrible asthma, and lived in LA, and we took away lectins and their autoimmune disease went away, their asthma went away. And so they went back to visit their home and they started eating, you know, traditional foods, brown breads, and they had no reaction. And they go, oh, this is great. You know, I'm cured. I can tolerate this now. They come back to the United States and start eating, you know, whole grain breads and things like this. Boom. The asthma came back, the autoimmune. Our food has been destroyed in this country. And our guts have been destroyed in this country. So, yeah, so, you know, sorry about that.
No, I agree 100%. It's not as easy as people think it is. So I guess, Solange, you have one question for Dr. Gundry?
Yeah, exactly. Because Doctor, we know, I completely agree with you. And we know that lectins, we are talking about that. And so do we have lectin in fruit and vegetables only when they are not ripe? That's mean not in season?
That's a great question. So plants want you to eat their fruit, believe it or not. Okay. They want you to eat their fruit because they want you to eat their seeds in that fruit, which are protected against digestion with, you know, a hard shell, if you will. And they want you to eat their babies and not hurt their babies and then walk off and poop their babies with a generous dollop of fertilizer someplace else. And that's why they want you to eat them. But when the fruit is developing, they don't want you to eat them because the babies aren't protected. So they actually put lectins into unripe fruit. And when I was a young man, we have an expression in the United States of the green apple two-step. Long before green apples like a Granny Smith were invented, when apples were green and you ate a lot of them, you would get very impressive cramps and diarrhea from the lectins in the unripe fruit. Because the plant didn't want you to do it. Nope, not yet. Sorry, you know, and you're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
So now, unfortunately, with, you know, the advent of 747s, we could pick fruit unripe in Chile or Argentina or Mexico and ship it here unripe and then use ethylene oxide to ripen it, make it appear ripe. But what we've learned is the plant, when the fruit becomes ripe and is attached to the plant, it literally it detoxifies the lectins. The lectins aren't present in ripe fruit. So we've made a horrible mistake in thinking that a fruit looks ripe, but it was picked unripe. And I think one of the problems in modern, you know, society is we can have fruit 365 days a year, which would have never, ever happened up until really 50 years ago. And we can have fruit from all over the world that's been picked unripe rather than, you know, off of a tree in our backyard. So that's why I urge people, please, 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 you know, eat fruit if you're going to eat it in season. and, you know, get it from a farmer's market. Don't, you know, don't, okay?
Yeah.
Obviously, yeah. And apart from cooking, which means referring to a fire, what are the other ways in which we can neutralize lectin-based grains and vegetables? So
Yes.
I'm picturing here, can juicing, for example, a lectin-based vegetable, using my regular juice extractor, can that help in reducing the harmful effect of the lectin?
We've seen actually a number of people react to juicing, for instance, tomatoes or cucumbers or peppers. And when we stop them juicing, that solved the problem. So I don't think juicing is the way to go.
Okay.
In general, the peels and the seeds of the nightshade family have most of the lectins. The squash family, like cucumbers, the peels and the seeds. The melon family, the peels and the seeds. Interestingly enough, watermelon is actually the only melon that's originally from Africa. So that all of us were really only exposed to one melon long, long ago, forever and ever, and that was the watermelon, interestingly enough. Most melons and squash family are North American and South American. So, and we forget that, you know, all of us are originally from Africa, Asia, or Europe. All of us.
Yeah.
And none of us were exposed to North or South American plants until 500 years ago, when Columbian trade started. And if you think about it, getting to know a new lectin-containing food in 500 years is, I mean, it's speed dating in evolution. So getting back to your point, even the Incas with quinoa knew how toxic the lectins were in quinoa, that they would soak quinoa and then they would ferment it, to answer your question. So fermentation using bacteria to eat the lectins is a very effective way of detoxifying lectins. So hot sauces, for instance, the peppers were always fermented. And so traditionally, cultures have fermented so many things. They didn't know that they were detoxifying lectins, but people said, oh, you know, don't eat that unless you ferment it. So fermentation is another great way. Soaking beans. The Italians will soak beans for 48 hours and change the water every 6 hours, throw it off, put in new water, because it will soak out lectins. And then the best thing you do is a pressure cooker. Pressure cooker will destroy all lectins except gluten.
Doctor, so where do we find the complete list of the food or vegetables that contain lectins?
So you can find my list on drgundry.com. And you can print out a PDF of it. You can laminate it. You can carry it to the stores.
Oh, very great. Okay.
There's a yes list and a no list.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I noticed that. So does the list that we have on your website mention the complete and exhaustive list of food-based lectins?
Well, not everything. There are a number of lectins that they've been in our diet for millions and millions of years. Even leaves have lectins in them, but the longer, and I talk about this in the book, the longer that we've been exposed to a lectin, the more, number one, our immune system has been educated that you've been eating this for 2 million years, it's not a big deal. And the longer our microbiome has been exposed to those lectins and have developed a defense against them and an ability to eat them.
I see. So your book addresses the fact that the most harmful lectin is not gluten, actually, that is found in wheat products, but rather WGA. Can you briefly let us know what is WGA? And
yeah, so WGA is wheat germ agglutinin, and it's abbreviated WGA because it's rather long and wordy to say. So WGA is present in the outside of the wheat. Gluten is present in the white part. endosperm. So the wheat germ agglutinin is a very, very tiny lectin that is so small that it can go across the gut wall without leaky gut. And one of the sad things I think people realize, most lectins are very large proteins, and they can't get through the gut wall, and thus they break and cause leaky gut, which they're good at it. But wheat germ agglutinin can go right through the gut wall without leaky gut. And wheat germ agglutinin binds to sugar molecules, and it's particularly interested in a sugar molecule that lines our blood vessels called Nu5AC. And I talk about this in the book. And it binds to this sugar molecule on our blood vessels, and it literally acts like a splinter. And so it's a foreign protein. And our white blood cells say, oh my gosh, there's a foreign protein stuck to our blood vessels, and it causes inflammation. And cholesterol is actually a patch that patches up inflammation. Cholesterol in itself is not a bad actor. So the more of these things that stick to your blood vessels, the more you promote plaque and coronary artery disease. And I recently published a paper at the American Heart Association showing that when we got whole grains, whole wheat out of people's diet, that the inflammation on their blood vessels dramatically subsided. So, and remember, most cultures have actually taken the hull off of wheat traditionally. Can you imagine living in France and having a whole wheat croissant?
I have not tasted one before there.
It's like Italy. Up until recently, and the tourists from America arrived, the idea of having whole wheat pasta, it's
mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing because they've been taking the troublemaking parts of wheat out. They did fine with gluten, but it was the other parts that were the troublemakers, and they were so smart that cultures for 10,000 years have been trying to take the hull off of wheat. And the rice was first cultivated 8,000 years ago. And 4 billion people use rice as their staple. And 4 billion people eat white rice instead of brown rice. How could they be so stupid? Because all the good stuff's in the brown rice. Well, they're not stupid. They've been getting rid of the bad part.
It was smarter.
They were a lot smarter.
So, doctors, painkillers are also believed to be harmful to our body. So, at least this is one of the lessons that your book teaches us. And given to the fact that you are also a heart surgeon and perform operation on your patients, so do you administer natural painkillers to them instead?
Well, for instance, immediately after heart surgery, we give painkillers through the veins, like morphine, for instance. And but one of the things that really impressed me early on when I started to study this is that we have to realize that all of these painkillers, like ibuprofen, let's use it, or naproxen, came with a warning from the FDA in our country that they were so dangerous that you could only prescribe them for 2 weeks and then you had to stop them. And now, they're over the counter. They don't come with that warning. But that warning was there for a purpose because, believe it or not, the federal government knew how dangerous these things were. But Big Pharma knows how profitable it is. I much prefer people take natural painkillers like Boswellia is an excellent example of that. Interestingly, some of the components in MSM, chondroitin sulfate, are actually lectin absorbers. They're blockers of lectins. So, and that's why people get pain relief. Monosodium.
Oh, that's great. So the Plant Paradox, your book, makes a lot of reference to changing our diet to improve our health. Do you also recommend exercising to your patient as part of the entire healing process?
Yeah, I mean, exercise is, is a huge part of any healing process. And I actually just finished my new book, which is called The Energy Paradox, which will be out February 7th of 2021. And I actually am recommending that people have exercise snacks instead of snacks.
This is a very good idea.
Yeah, and all I ask people to do is a couple times a day for 5 or 10 minutes when they would normally be snacking, go outside or in your own home. If you're stuck, you can do jumping jacks, you can do planks, you can do squats. Believe it or not, when I'm brushing my teeth, I do squats. I do deep knee bends because I'm not doing anything else for a minute. Might as well do deep knee bends. That was taught to me by the godfather of fitness, Jack LaLanne, when I knew him before he passed. 96, pretty good run. So yeah, it's a very important part of any health program.
Okay.
And since you two are sisters, I think it's important to realize, as I talked about in my book, The Longevity Paradox, also a New York Times bestseller, that if you look at women actually have a higher incidence of Alzheimer's disease than men. Most people don't know that, but most women should know that. If you look at women who exercise regularly through most of their life, they have an 80% less risk of Alzheimer's than women who don't exercise regularly. And even those women who do get Alzheimer's, the exerciser, the Alzheimer's arrives 11 years later than if they didn't exercise. And I mean, think about what that means. Instead of getting Alzheimer's at 80, you get it at 91. And 91. But think of the years you have with your grandkids, your great grandkids, and boy, and all you got to do is exercise regularly.
Wow, that's worth it.
Exactly.
Like I write prescriptions to get a dog.
Okay.
I got news for you. You got to take your dog out twice a day, whether you want to or not.
All right, I'm gonna get a dog tomorrow.
Yeah, me too. So you guys, are you watching us? This is important, as Dr. Gundry say, we have to do exercises.
Yeah.
That's right. And I did it last week. I actually wrote another prescription to get a dog. And some people, they bring them back framed, and they said, this is the best prescription a doctor has ever written for me. And I actually think it is.
I agree. I'd rather have that than medications, to be honest with you.
Exactly. This is a good idea. So, doctor, what about the mental health of a patient that you put on a lectin-free diet? So do you consider the holistic approach as we consider it in naturopathy, besides nutrition, in the treatment of your patient? Yeah,
absolutely. It turns out we're beginning to realize, and the energy paradox, there's a lot of that in here. We used to talk about the gut-brain axis, that the neurons in the gut talk to the brain, and there are more neurons in your gut, surrounding your gut, than are in your spinal cord. Mm-hmm. We now know that we were wrong about that it's the microbiome, the gut bacteria, that talk to the neurons around the gut and to the brain directly. And they actually, there's some very good studies that probably most anxiety and depression comes from gut dysbiosis, having the wrong bacteria in your gut and not making the proper compounds for your brain. And Dr. Daniel Amen, who's become a friend of mine, is now convinced with his new book that much of mental health issues that we thought were somehow something screwed up in the brain is coming from the gut.
Right.
So yes, Hippocrates was right. I mean, let's give him his credit. I didn't think about this. I mean, 2,500 years ago, all disease begins in the gut, and that's mental disease as well.
Exactly.
Awesome.
there's a new paper out that suggests that antidepressants work not by some magical miracle thing of serotonin reuptake inhibitors, but they change the gut microbiome to become actually a better gut microbiome. And maybe that's why it takes a month for antidepressants to have effect, because it took that long to change the microbiome.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow. A true difference.
Yeah.
All right. So, Doctor, thank you so much for your answers. This was the last question that we had for you, unfortunately. I would go hours and hours just talking to you. I really love listening to you, and we love having you here. But that takes us to the end of this interview. We thank you so much for being with us.
And if you want more, the Dr. Gundry podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts, so you can see my little smiling face every week.
And don't forget to get one of these books, and I love it. Truly a game changer. We do recommend it. Not only the plant paradox, but the entire book that Dr. Gundry has published is very, very interesting. You're going to change your life for the better.
Exactly.
Trust me.
Well, thank you. They were very nice and great meeting both of you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Doctor. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you have not done so. And don't forget to like this channel. And we will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you.